Okay, welcome to the Return to Curling Town Hall, all the people coming in. And we're just about to get going for the Return to Curling webinar, Town Hall webinar. So we're just waiting for all of the attendees to come in. Looks like we've got quite a few people coming in. We're supposed to have about 80 to 90 people on this call, so we're looking forward to that. Okay, I think the attendees have kind of stopped coming in quickly, so I think we can go ahead and just get the presentation started. So today we're talking about the Return to Curling guidelines that Curl BC produced. And this is your chance for getting some questions answered. We asked for people to send questions in advance if they could. We got quite a few questions, so thank you very much for that. And without further ado, let's get going. So in this presentation, we're going to do an overview of the guidelines, and then we're going to talk about the survey results on the survey that we put out. Kim's going to go through what the phases mean, what some of the game modifications mean, and some of the details of that. We're also going to talk about occupancy limits. We're also going to talk about Bonspiels and events and how that can go ahead. We're going to talk about masks, the declaration for COVID-19 that Curling Canada has provided as a resource. We're going to go through that. We're also going to talk about the different resources available. And then at the very end is going to be this time for questions. So what we'd like to do is actually go through the presentation first and then have the question period afterwards. So if you do have any questions, you can, if you don't want to forget what the questions are, you can write them down in the Q&A, or you can ask them live. So when we get to that part after the presentation, you can just raise your hand to speak. And then I'll say your name, and then you can ask your question. Please keep yourself muted when you're not talking. And we're going to try to limit this town hall to 1 hour. So additional questions, I'm sure we'll have a few still left at the end, will be put as an FAQ on our website. So that will be posted up on our website, depending on how many questions we have, hopefully in the next couple of days. Early next week is probably a good time to aim for that. And I will keep going. So just as a general overview, these Return to Curling guidelines were shared on July 7th. A lot of work went into them, making sure that we were adhering to the guidelines that Via Sport put out for all sports across BC to share with their local sports organizations. So we focused on the processes to open, the measures to avoid outbreaks, and what you need to do in case of an outbreak. So those are all the things that should be in your own personal club's plans as well. And this guide is for all curling clubs, so it's not, for a private club or a municipal club. We try to make the guide broad enough so that it would apply to all curling clubs. So there might be things in there that don't apply to your curling club, but there may also be things that apply to your curling club that don't apply to another club. So keep that in mind when you read that. Yeah, and so for our first topic, it's going to be, actually, this is me. This is the survey results. I'm going to just talk briefly about this, just so you have a sense of how people out there are feeling about curling. So we asked in our survey, which some of you did share with your members, how people are feeling about returning to curl. And we had about 1,200 responses. And what we discovered is quite telling, because what we discovered is that for about 2/3 of people, it's very important to them that adequate safety measures are in place. So when you think about that, that's a good chunk of curlers who probably won't come back to curl unless we have some of these measures in place, like physical distancing. So that's a good thing to kind of think about as you make your plans for your club. There's only about 5% of people who said they would not come back. The other 30 or so percent said they would participate no matter what. So you kind of don't need to worry about that 30%. They're your group who will come back, but a big chunk, that 2/3, you need to be ensuring that those curlers are comfortable. And I'll just ask Kim to speak now on phases.
Thanks, Rebecca, for that great lead into. So it's so fantastic to see how many people are willing to come back to curling, and the response that we have has been overall positive. So within our phases, Curl BC will be determining which phase our clubs are going to be operating within. We will be taking our cue from VIA Sport and the Provincial Health Officer. So at this point, curling clubs and centers can plan to start their season within the return to curling phase 2 restrictions. We will show you a link later on as well where you can find out where the sports sector is in terms of phases, and then how that then relates to us for curling specifically. So within our return to curling phases, they were created to fit within the guidance we received from VIA Sport's sport activity chart, and then to provide a strategy for our clubs to easily move from one phase to another, either by loosening and or restricting, to have minimal impact on our operations. So the overall key that I do want to highlight is that ability to maintain that 2 meters of physical distancing within phase 2 and phase 3. So, you know, if when we're starting in phase 2, opening our doors, getting used to our new protocols and procedures and the flow within our facility, as well as the flow of how the game is going to look with these changes, it is important to have all of these measures in place so that as we get to dial up and add more people into playing and participating at the same time, and or having to revert back into a more restricted phase within phase 2. So it's really important that our clubs become comfortable and all of our members become comfortable with how we can do that throughout the season, depending on what is happening with COVID within our province. So this is a great opportunity for our sport to be a little more creative and flexible in the available options that we have for our clubs participating during the season. I'll just quickly ask if there's any specific phases questions that have come up, Rebecca, before I go on to the next one. Okay. I'm going to move on, get you to move on to the next slide then. Okay, game modifications has been really big question that's come in. We do have working groups that have had some great discussions on what different game modifications can look like. So within each club or league, it is going to be up to you to assess which modifications are going to fit your operations the best. So with our guide, we laid out how many people that you can have per team on the ice at one time. So that way we can have an easier transition between having 3 or 4 people on the ice and then what it looks like with 2. So how the variations of the gameplay go, you get to have a little bit of flexibility with how you do that. So there has been some confusion within our phases with saying that using the terms of doubles or triples. So I would like to clarify that doubles was meant to say 2-person games. You could use the rules outlined by Curling Canada to play the doubles game as they have set up, or you could come up with your own rules around what a game looks like for 2-person curling. So I want everyone to feel like they do have that flexibility and you're not stuck to only playing one version of 2-player curling. So It was more to say you can have 2 people on the ice at one time, or as we move up into the end of phase 2, beginning of phase 3, and having 3 players on the ice, you could use the outlined triples rules that Curling Canada has out, or you could just modify a 4-person game, either have everybody throw 2 rocks, or do what you would have done if you were a 3-person game and your 4th was missing, and your leads and seconds throw the 3 rocks and your skips throw 2 rocks. So it is going to come down to the comfort level of what each club wants curling to look like in their facility, as well as each league may decide to adopt different rules that is more suitable to what game style that they want to play. So sweeping. As we saw with Curling Canada's guidelines, they have also stated that only 1 person will be sweeping a shot. So with having their guidelines, I would like to say that they had to keep theirs broad enough to cover the different operations within all of the provinces in Canada. So as we've seen, some provinces and territories are not even going to have curling returning, while other provinces have way less restrictions than what we are seeing here in BC. So it is a starting point of being able to return to curling. As well, it does give the opportunity for everyone to maintain their bubbles. So not everyone coming back to curling, as we saw in the survey, is going to be able to open their bubbles even within their teammates. So what we are doing is creating the space out on the ice so that we can have as many people coming back to participate as we can. So the considerations are there with only having 3 people per team involved in a shot to ensure that comfort level, that people can maintain that physical distancing during the flow of the game. So it could mean that the are able to maintain that physical distancing within their own teams, as well as teams being able to maintain their distance from their oppositions and anyone on the neighboring sheets next to them. So it is all about creating a space so that we can get as many people to come back and participate as possible. It is a big change, and hopefully the work that we are doing once we do open our doors and continue to see our province making progress and opening up and loosening restrictions, that we can get back to having the 4 people involved with every shot on the ice. So it is a stepping stone. It is going to be a bit of a process, but just know that we're not going to find ourselves in one scenario for an entire season. So we do need to be flexible and adaptable with that. Youth curling has been another big topic that has come in through some of the questions. So our guidance for youth curling is, for each club, you're going to have to figure out what your comfort level is with having youth curling programming. So that may be a discussion you'll need to have with those that are your instructors, finding out what their comfort level is. Some other considerations that have come out of our discussions have been starting with any older groups that have already been on the ice, so that you're working through skill development and you can set them up doing skills so that there's a little less of a need for hands-on coaching. Some coaches have discussed wearing personal protective equipment such as masks, face shields, and gloves. So there are going to be some adaptations. As our working groups continue with their work, we will provide more guidance as we move closer to the season on what that could look like. So it is going to come down to the comfort level within your facilities and when you may decide to start running your youth curling programming. Your clubs may start with getting all of their regular leagues and members back in, and then slowly adding extra programming or extra leagues once you've gotten started and you're feeling comfortable and all of this hard work that you've put together is working. So moving on to some of the other discussions that have come out of our working group. So modifying the lengths of leagues has been a big discussion point. I have heard everything from length of leagues, looking at 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 and 10, and running shorter leagues to get started, just with that unknown of when a second wave could potentially hit or what cold and flu season would look like. So modifying the lengths of leagues is one way for some of the clubs and facilities to at least be able to collect the revenue, run part of a league, and know that you've been able to complete that. So some people that may feel comfortable in coming back for 4 weeks, test it out, may then sign up for another 4-week league. So each club is going to have to figure out what's going to work the best for them, but there are varying options out there for you. Following that, modifications for the length of league games has been another big topic as well, just to help increase the time in between league draws to allow for any enhanced cleaning and or depending on lobby space for moving people in and out of the ice area with minimizing contact with other groups. So that way, if a league did have someone where they were tested, where they found out that they did have COVID, it would be a smaller group that may be impacted instead of all members within your club. So length of league games could be everything from starting with having 7-end games. Other discussions have talked about having a set time, and once your timer or buzzer goes off, that you either finish up the end you were on without being able to move on to the one more end. And others have indicated that once that buzzer goes off, regardless of how many rocks are left, that would be the end of your game. So there are different options available. Again, it's going to be a conversation with your clubs and your league reps, depending on which variation you want to incorporate. And then modifying gameplay. So transitioning from that 2-player, 3-player, 4-player. So an example I'd like to give here is if we are opening up and we're in phase 3, where we've been able to loosen, we have our 3 people out on the ice, and we have to dial back. So going from having your 3 players on the ice to 2 players could look like in my Monday Ladies League, for that 2-hour space that our team would be playing a regular game with all 4 players, could then get split into 2 1-hour blocks. So now 2 of my teammates could be playing from 6:30 to 7:30. They would come off the ice, and then the next 2 teammates, with having 2 players on the ice, could go from that 7:30 to 8:30. So that's just one modification where you could still have all 4 team members being able to participate in part of a game. Mind you, it is a little bit of shorter time, but at least it is time that we are able to get out onto the ice. So there's been some really fun discussions on what these modifications could look like. And as these resources are available, we will be adding them onto our documents and forms page.
Kim, do you want me to go to the other slide, or do you want to answer? There's one question about game modifications. Do you want to answer that one now, or do you want to wait to the end?
I will wait to the end for that.
Okay.
So that way, in case any other ones come up throughout, I can group them together. Okay, occupancy. Occupancy was one that we had to put a lot of thought into. We've had questions as to why we didn't put a limit of the curlers that can be out on the ice. And the general answer is we have such a range of operations and number of sheets within our clubs that picking one number wasn't necessarily going to be an answer that fit most of our facilities. So each facility is quite unique to the number of entrances, available square footage. So with that in mind, how we came up with our occupancy limits was with the number of players that we could have on the ice curling at one time. So the other considerations for what occupancy looks like is also what your lobby area space is. So once your club has figured out what an occupancy limit is within each of the space of being able to move people in and out, that will also determine how many people are going to be going out onto the ice one time and coming off and moving around. So a place where you can start off by figuring out what occupancy limits could look like in your facility is using your fire safety plans as a starting point. And then as you start looking at the other spaces, so your lobbies, if you have any meeting rooms, offices, your pro shops, your washrooms, your change rooms, if you decide to have them open right away, is ensuring that you post your occupancy limits within those spaces for how many people can be there. So it's not so much us picking a number and getting all of our clubs to fit within it, but it's each club looking at how can they incorporate physical distancing, keeping that 2 meters of physical distancing for everyone coming into their building is the bigger key for figuring out what that looks like than us having said, 64 people or 30 people. So I hope that answers some of those initial questions that we've had on that. The one occupancy limit that is there is that limit of participants for an event is still 50 under the provincial health order of mass gatherings. I'm going to ask Rebecca to share. We have a few clubs that gave us some samples of mapping out their lobby areas that I'd like to share with you guys for any clubs that haven't had an opportunity to start looking at how they would map that flow out, or for individuals wondering what considerations are taken into place. So just bear with us here.
What one would you like to see? The Langley one, I think it's a Esquimalt, or the Golden Ears one?
Could you put the Langley one out first? Okay.
Are you seeing it?
Yes. Okay. I'm not sure if you'll see my area. So on this one here was provided to us by Robin Parks of the Langley Curling Center. So as you see the arrows coming in, that is their entrance. The flow for their space then goes to the left. So part of the consideration with this particular facility is their wheelchair lift is on the left side of the stairs. So when you are figuring out what the flow in your lobby space is going to look like before games, it is important to remember that if you have any wheelchair lifts so that you can still be accessible to all of your groups and members, that will play a part in your consideration of how you move people onto the ice and off of the ice. So within Langley, it shows everyone coming into the left. There's those squiggly lines with the middle. So that's kind of like a neutral space for everybody, and a kind of a bit of a barrier between those waiting behind sheets 1, 2, and 3, and then kind of that separation from those going on 4, 5, and 6. So within their space, there's more than enough room here. The arrows is the walkway area, and then there is more than enough room between their windows and this walkway for people to physically distance within their teams and their oppositions. So this is one of the clubs that is lucky to have enough space to get everybody on and off of the ice at the same time. And then if you look on the sheets as well, there is a walkway. So between sheets 2 and 3, there is additional space that if they were to have a staggered start where some people are starting on the home end or some people are starting on the away end, there is a walkway here for people to move up and down and maintain that distancing. And as you follow the arrows off of the ice, the wheelchair exit, you can see it before the stairs. Then everyone else would come up off the stairs and be able to move up into the lounge after the game. So a lot of great thought put into this plan. And this is a simple thing that your club can put together to send out to your members to give them that visual of what it will look like, where people will be waiting before we start to open our doors. And really quickly, if we could show the one from Golden Years as well. So while this is coming up, part of the reason I want to show you this one from Golden Years Winter Club is part of our hierarchy of controls is physical distancing is our greatest control with reducing the risk of transmitting COVID-19. Then underneath that is your engineered controls. So this is the Golden Years Winter Club. As you can see, all the squares that they have, those are the tables that they already have in their lobby. So at this point, the chairs have been removed, but the tables can be used as a physical barrier between between teams as well. So in here, in the middle is neutral. So it's this additional space where if someone was at the table 3E there on the left, wanted to say hi to somebody on the table below, which said 6L, L means late, E means early, that they could stand at the end of those tables and still have a conversation with other members of the league, but doing so in a physically distanced way. And then you have that added reminder with those physical barriers that this is where you can stand to maintain, as well as giving you that additional space between other people so that that distance, those lines aren't crossed. So another example of the creativity happening with our clubs, with their lobby spaces, and what you can do. So I hope this helps to give other clubs and facilities some ideas on what flow of traffic could look through your lobby, how you can use some of the things that you already have there without having to purchase additional physical barriers, and just really utilizing what we already have. So, okay. Bonspiels and events. So within our phase 2, the focus, and this did come from via sport activity chart, again, of that range of what our sports can be delivering and doing within their guidance. So everything here is based on club-based activity and staying, local. The 50-person limit would then be for facility. And for the purposes of curling, local can be defined as the people who would normally be curling and participating in your club, even if they do live in an adjacent community. So local wasn't defined as you could only play in the spot that your city is in. An example of that could be within the Lower Mainland, someone living in North Delta, but curling in New Westminster, or a case of that on the island where someone lives in Comox and is curling in Campbell River. So local, we've done our best to keep it broad to those individuals that would normally be participating in your leagues. Then as we move into our phase 3 of curling and introducing Bonspiels, that's where that interclub regional events starts to come back into play and opening up the size, as well as being able to run dual events at the same time, with the caveat being if you had 50 people playing on the ice and you had a different event using your lounge, that those two groups stay completely separate so that there's no crossing paths or increasing your risk if someone was to have COVID to the number of individuals that would then contract that. Within our working groups, we are going to be coming up with some additional resources of samples of what Bonspiels could look like operating within COVID so that they're still bringing in revenue for your clubs. The biggest consideration we've had so far is looking at recommending pool play for Bonspiels. It is one of the biggest ways to minimize group sizes and minimizing transmission with risks with the participants. So if you have 3 pools with 4 teams within them, and they're all only playing against each other, they're on the ice at the same time, off the ice at the same time. Again, if someone was to have COVID, that would be a lot smaller of a group than if you had your regular triple knockout and people are crossing paths at a lot of different points. So something to think about when you are working on your scheduling for what Bonspiels would look like. Another consideration is instead of running a 2-day spiel, you could run 2 one-day spiels. So you could have your novice group of individuals play on the 1 day, and then you could have your intermediates and advanced curlers playing on the 2nd day. So there are ways around being able to use the same timing you would run a Bonspiel and just adjusting the delivery of what that would look like.
Thank you very much, Kim. For this next slide, we're going to ask Will to jump in here and talk a little bit about competitions, which is at a slightly not as advanced stages where we're at when we're talking about just returning and opening our clubs. So without further ado, Will, could you take over?
Yeah, thanks very much. So yeah, thanks Rebecca for moderating today, and thank you, Kim, for kind of going into the key details of our return to curling, documents there to give everyone a little understanding of where we're at. In terms of competition, like Kim said, today sport is in phase 2, and we're working towards moving to phase 3 with regard to Via Sport, return to sport guidelines, and regard to the activity chart that has already been referenced today. In order for competitions to begin to happen in British Columbia, we'll definitely have to move into phase 3 of that return to sport phase, just to give you that full understanding. And then even once we move there, as Kim has already said, we will also need to see some adaptations made to allow for more travel across the province for some of those provincial or Bonspiel events to happen that have teams coming from different parts of the province to one location. But some key information for you that we do have today is August 6th will be when we know whether Curling Canada is running the 2020 Canadian Mixed Championships and the 2020 Canadian Curling Club Championships. If those events still run, we do have tentative dates for our 2020 BC Mix to happen at the Kelowna Curling Clubs, and our 2020 BC Club Challenge event to happen, thank you, Rebecca, our 2020 BC Club Challenge event to happen at the Royal City Curling Club and the Delta Curling Club. So as you can imagine, with 12 sheets of ice for that combined gender event, we'll have the social distancing in place that Kim has alluded to. And then for that mixed championship with 8 teams at the Kelowna Curling Club, we were able to do the social distancing that Kim talks about. But a key for those events to run would be for us to be in phase 3 and for travel to be allowed within the province of British Columbia for competitions and sport. And so we're not there yet, and I just want to make sure everyone has that sort of understanding today as we go into this. We will open up registrations for the regional playdowns for 2021 in mid-September. We're also hoping that we'll open our registration for our BC championships that are open at that time as well. Again, that will depend on the activity chart and where we find ourselves at in relation to that. Like I've already said, sport needs to move into phase 3 for competition involving travel to take place. Some of the key COVID-19 rule changes that we already know we're going to have to follow are one sweeper. So, you know, like Kim said, only 3 people involved in every shot. Even in circumstances where it's the BC Curling Tour or the BC Junior Curling Tour, where we're really just talking about a 12-team bubble and maybe only and maybe teammates who you travel with and people you see all the time, there will still be circumstances where people do want to follow that principle of 6 feet of social distancing. And that's why that one sweeper rule is in place there from Curling Canada. And it's really great to see that. Skips cannot sweep behind the tee line. So that's one of those ones that stands out. And obviously that supports that principle of social distancing. No handshakes, kind of a no-brainer. It's kind of already gone away at most major championships. Someone usually gets sick and we kind of don't get to do that anyhow during the event. So that's a key one. And then obviously 6 feet or more away from those not within your bubble. And we do want to create an environment where people who do want to play with everyone not within their bubble, they can still do that. Dates for the regional, open, and provincial events are posted on our website. So you can go ahead and check those out now. They are all tentative. To give you a little bit of updated information from today, very quickly, under the direction of the World Curling Federation, who made the announcement yesterday, the Canadian Curling Canada has announced that the CTRS, the Canadian Team Ranking System, will not be awarding any points to teams until after October 31st. So the messaging that we really take from that is they're not encouraging teams across Canada to travel to events until after that date, or at least don't want to create an environment that is forcing teams to do that. In BC, we had a meeting yesterday with 5 events that are part of the BC Curling Tour. As you might know, Vernon event, which was the first to happen this year, it has been postponed. And the other events are still being planned, but they're really looking at some modifications that involve things like Kim's talking about in that bubble. So pool play, maximum 12 teams per event. So a 12-team men's event, a 12-team women's event. In the case of a major event like Penticton, maybe they'll be looking at 12 teams if travel's allowed from outside of the provinces in one bubble, and then 12 teams from within the BC then in another bubble. So all sorts of interesting ideas are being floated around out there right now. So rest assured that's happening. And I think that's about all I have, Rebecca. So back over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Will. We're going over time a little bit, so I'm just going to take not a very long look at masks. There's been a few people who've asked us whether or not masks will be mandatory or advised. We keep monitoring the advice on this because we're hearing different things as sort of the science and the evidence evolves. So what we do know is that physical distancing is the best protection that you'll have. So if you, at all times, if you can stay 2 meters apart from somebody, then you should be doing that as a first priority. And then we know that masks can be a sort of secondary layer of protection. And particularly for someone like a staff member who might need to be in close contact with another staff member or something like that, it would be a good idea for them to be wearing masks. And if curlers would like to wear masks in the lobby as a secondary protection, or volunteers, for example, behind a bar, that would be a good place for people to be wearing masks. However, when you get to the ice shed, it's a little bit more complicated. SportMed BC is currently not advising that you wear a mask while you're sweeping or doing any sort of physical exertion where you're really needing to breathe a lot. So we would say if people are sweeping, then they shouldn't be wearing a mask, but you can, curlers can choose to wear a mask if they're playing a game where they're not sweeping. So there's some modifications to the game, 2-person stick curling, where there's no sweeping, where it would be perfectly fine for curlers to wear a mask. However, one of the things that people should be aware of is that SportMed BC and other scientists are saying that how well your mask protects you goes down as time goes on, and particularly in a humid environment like an ice shed. Your mask will work quite well at first, but at the end of 1 or 2 hours, it's not going to work as well. So it's just important people are not relying on that mask and thinking they're safe and can talk to people within, a foot or 2 feet of each other. They still have to keep that physical distance. But it definitely should be a personal choice whether or not people want to wear a mask. Or I mean, your municipality might even say it's mandatory in certain areas of the club. So that's just going to be up to your local community. And then I'm going to pass this over to Melissa Sim, who's going to talk about the health declaration that you guys may be noticing other organizations are getting you to sign as well.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. So I'm going to do this really quickly because we do want to get to questions because there are many that are coming in. So this health declaration is a recommendation from Via Sport for us to essentially collect some information from our curlers before they go onto the ice. And as you see on the screen there, I've set out what the declaration is and what it is not, and then what the current recommendations are. So what it is essentially an agreement between the curler and the club that they're aware of what COVID-19 is. I mean, at this point, who isn't? But it is a reminder of what the symptoms are, what the signs are, and it's a reminder and a reinforcement of the illness policy that many of our clubs will be implementing in the fall. So that's essentially if you are sick or if you think you're going to be sick, please do not come to the curling rink. Stay home until your symptoms have gone away. For those people who are entering into the club, it is a confirmation of your health status, so that you have not been sick, that you have not been in any environment in which you could have been exposed to COVID-19, and it's essentially a self-assessment. So like many things in curling, we're trusting that you know where you've been, we're trusting that you know what you've been up to, and that you can as close to 100% say that you have not been exposed to COVID-19, and to the best of your knowledge, you do not have COVID-19 at the time that you step into the building and then onto the ice. What this health declaration is not a waiver. So a waiver is essentially a legal document where you are most times being asked to, among other things, you're being asked to give up your right to sue an organization if you believe the organization has been negligent in any way, shape, or form. So if you get sick at the club, this health declaration is not going to be your way to sue the club or to not sue the club. And what that health declaration is going to be is probably going to help the club when there is an outbreak that may be linked back to the club or to a curler or to any other individual in the club, for a club to be able to say to the health authority, these are the things that we have put into place. These are our cleaning policies. These are all the practices that we have implemented to clean and to keep social distancing. And then this is the information that we've been collecting from people so that we know what people are doing. Hopefully what that means is that you health authorities are confident enough in what you have done that they don't shut you down, and that any shutdown will then be voluntary in order to do deep cleaning, as we've seen many organizations and many restaurants and bars choose to do when one of their staff people have come forward to say that they've been infected or may have been exposed to COVID-19. So the current recommendations right now is to have everybody fill out a health declaration and sign a health declaration before stepping onto the ice. I know that this is going to be an administrative burden on many of our clubs. So what we're going to do in the next few weeks here is look at some ways in which we can maybe automate this process so that people can sign these declarations online before they go on to play in their draws. Or figure out a way that people can do these recommendations, can sign these declarations so that it's not an onerous process for the clubs to then collect this information. So stay tuned for that, and we'll bring more information as these things change, because right now the health declaration is a strong recommendation from VS Sport to do, but we things will change in September, October. So.
Thank you very much, Melissa. That's awesome. That's kind of our mantra lately, is things will change. Okay, just moving on to the next slide. I think I'll ask Kim just to take this one on, unless she thinks there's a better person to do it.
Thanks, Rebecca. So real quick, we will be a reminder that the slides of this presentation will be made available on our website, as well as the recording for this for anyone who wants to send it out to any additional board members or to their members in general. So we do have a resources, documents, forms page up there for you guys right now. That's where all of the templates we have completed up to date are going to be available. As more with our working groups are finalized and processed, we'll be adding them there as well. So the FAQ will be loaded up there, as Rebecca said, to start this off. There is also the link to VS Sport, Return to Sport, so you can look through their document, look at their activity sport chart, as well as seeing their guidance on what phase sport is in. Curling Canada now has a COVID-19 resource page as well. We do have links to majority of their waivers and templates, but there is a direct link. The other two important links for us here at BC is the BC Recreation Parks Association, as well as the Recreation Facility Association of BC. So a number of recommendations from our guideline also came from aligning with these other associations that our clubs are working with.
And now we get to the question period. So we only have, I'd say, how many? About 17 minutes to go through some questions. There's a lot of them. So we know that we're probably going to have to answer some of these online, but we will try to get to them all. And if you think of something else, where you go, oh, I forgot to ask that, well, you can always email Kim or Melissa. You can email me too, but try them first. They're more knowledgeable. So the first question that came up was from Patrick, and he's asking, would it be safe allowed during phase 2 to have 4-person games if we were only using every other sheet? So the throwing team has the whole sheet and non-throwing team has a sheet. That is the question. And I think I'm gonna throw that to Kim and see if she can answer that one.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. So with looking at what we could do in phase 2 and 3 with having the number of people that we put on the ice, Patrick, in this particular sense, we also had to create a standard for all of our clubs so that if an additional measure that your club wants to take to keeping people separate by not using a sheet, we would leave that up to your particular club. However, with getting as many people back out on the ice as we could using majority of the sheets that are already there, the three people per team or having 6 people on each sheet really allowed us to maximize for our starting point. Again, this is with the best information that I have today. This could change depending on what happens as we move into the season and throughout the season. But also doing some quick math, if you use 3 sheets of ice with 8 people, that's 24 people out on your ice. But if you had 6 people on every sheet, you had 36 people out on your ice. So this was a way for us to maximize getting as many people using your facility and then going upstairs into your lounge afterwards. Okay,
thanks, Kim. I think that's great. Pam from Marple has a quick question about how people are able to put on their shoes, because people could theoretically come dressed for curling except for their shoes, I guess. So Kim, can you answer that one?
Putting on shoes has been a hot topic in a lot of our working groups. Again, this is going to be something that each club is going to have to tackle depending on what your lobby layout looks like. So there have been some considerations of, only having 1 or 2 chairs available for those people that want to use it. Again, one of the things that your club would have to look at, should you choose to leave your chairs in your lobby for people to sit on, is who's going to be cleaning them, or how will you communicate to your members of just being mindful when they sit somewhere, sanitizing their hands. So this is something that each individual club is going to have to tackle. I've seen areas where there's 1 chair at the front entrance and there were shelves for everyone to put their shoes onto so that no dirt was even tracked into the curling club itself. So everyone's going to have to be a little bit creative on how they want to tackle this. But I would suggest whatever you do have available for people to use is very easy for them to clean, and either having something for them to use to sanitize it with before, after, or at least having some sanitizer available for them to use. So.
Excellent, thank you very much. Now I'm going to go to a question from Shannon and Dean from Golden Ears. And they're asking, during a 3-person game, can you rotate players in and out of the game? So if you have a team of 4 to 5 players, can the 4th and fifth person rotate in during a game. So that's ensuring you stick with the 3 players only on the ice. And Kim, I think I'm going to throw that one to you too. I'll find someone else to pick on after this.
I feel like I'm in the hot seat right now. Okay, so 3 people on the ice at one time. Whether or not you choose to rotate players in and out, I would maybe recommend not doing this initially as you're starting your season, as you want to ensure everything that we've worked hard on for protocols and procedures are working, figuring out when your checkpoint is before you start to add in additional people. The other consideration for this is going to depend on the scheduling that you have for your leagues for getting that one draw off and when you're allowing the next draw to come into your building, as well as what your lobby space looks like. So part of this is going to depend on how much room you have on your backboards available, as well as how much room that you're going to have in your lobby space. Because if you start having these additional players from one particular draw there, it's going to impact your total occupancy limit as the next group is coming in. So I am not going to say one way or another. There is room for having 4 people out on the ice as we move towards the end of phase 3. But just ensure that you've done your due diligence to look through all those risk factors that come along with starting to add additional people into your spaces.
Okay, thanks very much. Sorry, I'm just looking at some of the questions, trying to find one that you're not the best person to answer here, Kim. So I'm going to put myself in the hot seat, I think. Jeff Ginter, Dawson Creek, I believe, is asking if Curl BC is planning to develop any marketing themes or promotions that can be shared to clubs. For example, targeting the snowboard crowd that will most likely not be able to travel into the USA this coming winter. This may be a chance to increase our participants. Yes, it's not something that's actually really crossed my mind. So thank you, Jeff, for that. It looks like Scott has an answer for that, but I think it's a good idea. So that's what I'll say, but I'll let Scott give his answer too.
Thanks, Rebecca. Hot off the press, Curling Canada is doing this and had just asked us this morning if it would be good to put on a webinar. And so they're developing some materials for us.
Perfect. So job done already. We work fast here. So Rob Norden in Kamloops is asking, does a health declaration need to be signed at every game? And he's saying that's brutal. I'm not going to disagree with that. I'm going to throw that over to Melissa. I think she's working on an answer for you.
Yeah, so yes, that is brutal because that means that if you have a 26-week game, that's 26 weeks times however many people that you have signing these declarations every week. So that's a lot of paperwork for clubs to collect and keep track of. At this time, what we know is that the health declaration is something that is being recommended to be signed before people walk into the facility and then onto the ice. So as I said, if we were to start curling tomorrow, that's what needs to happen. Whether that will change come September, October, we don't know yet. I'm also looking for VS Sport and the PHO to provide a little bit more direction on this health declaration because I'll admit I just went out of town to the South Okanagan and did a wine tour of various wineries, and I was never asked to sign a health declaration, although I was asked in 1 or 2 places about whether I had COVID-19 symptoms or had was anywhere where I may have been exposed to COVID-19. So I don't know if contact tracing will allow us to kind of get around the health declaration, and if posters that are posted at highly visible places in our clubs that remind people what the COVID-19 symptoms are and to stay home if you do have COVID-19 and what the club policies are with regards to COVID-19 will be enough. And so sort of help us get around this health declaration so that we're not, collecting tons and tons of paper to keep and kill trees for that purpose. So as I say, stay tuned for that. That particular recommendation may change as we get closer to the opening of the season.
Scott, you had something to add?
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, as some of you may know, I'm at the North Shore Winter Club. It's been open for 2 months. The first day we had to sign off on this, a couple of different waivers and our declaration of health. And then the next couple of weeks were verbally asked a couple of questions, and we had to answer no to both of them before we were allowed in the door. And since that time, we're not asked anything. So there's quite a variety of standards going on depending on whether it's public or private. Or I know recreation centers right now, they're having a manager outside the door asking everybody where they've been and so on. So I think it does make a difference if you have a group that is really your big bubble, if you will, your club. And so you'll find that I think by September this will change. It doesn't make a lot of sense to have to sign it every time. However, you probably should have a process that they're like Melissa said, that there's something posted that don't enter here, and that's very clear. If you have any, can't say no to all these questions, and also you may want to have at least a verbal questioning piece. Hope that helps.
Okay, thanks very much, Scott. Penny from Parksville had a question that I thought was a good one to look at. I don't know that we have an answer, but it's maybe a good one for us to look at. Kim maybe knows it. The question is, do you have any indications from clubs as to when they are starting, such as October 1st delaying it to November 1st or January startup? Because her feeling is that if you start up now and have to close, it would have a huge cost for startup and then no revenue as having to reimburse curlers. So Kim, do you have something to add to that?
I do have a bit of a indication from clubs that I've been in contact with. So it looks like there have been a number that usually start early are delaying towards the beginning of October. There are a few that are considering doing 8-week leagues, so running from October to December, whatever their start time and end time may be, and then reevaluating for whether or not they continue to run in January. So the indication we have right now is looking a lot starting in October. There have been a number of discussions on, the cost of putting in your ice and being able to recoup that before you would potentially have to close your doors in a worst case scenario. But that is part of the risk management process and template that we did provide our clubs. So each club is going to have to look at that scenario of full season, partial season, or a really abrupt and whether or not which scenarios your club would be able to get through as part of your financial planning as well. From doing some rough math with one of the working groups that we had with ice install, if you had a $15,000 install price, it roughly worked out to having 300 people pay $50 to come and use your ice within 1 month. So they're hoping to put together some sample budgets for you guys to have in helping with making some of those decisions on what's going to work the best for your club. But make sure that you have a chance to sit down and plan for some of these scenarios before you do decide to open your doors.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Kim. We only have about 4 or 5 minutes left, so we'll just maybe take 1 or 2 more questions depending on how long it takes for us to answer them. So I'm just going to find one maybe that in a topic that we haven't actually fully talked about in this question period. There's one from Gary McKinnon, Peace Arch, and he's asking, according to earlier webinar with Bar Lounge Association, that was the Able BC webinar, I believe he's talking about. We were told that on ice crowd and upstairs lounge crowd are two separate events. You could have up to 49 people on the ice and 49 people in the bar. So socially distanced, of course. Is this still the case? Kim sort of answered this in the occupancy limit slide, but maybe you can elaborate a bit more about that sort of two separate event question.
Yes, so part of, with Jeff's webinar, the lounge webinar that we had, so this was based on the province also moving within phase 3. So while our province is in phase 3, sports sector is still in phase 2. So it's all this process of getting everybody started and going again. So for us, and even for the bar lounge industry, before moving into phase 3, in phase 2, it was only 50 people or half of your capacity, whichever those two fit within that. So for us, as we made this guideline, the 50 event within phase 2 was more for your facility. And that's also what a number of our clubs were being told that are in municipalities. So within phase 3, if you did have 50 people on the ice and 50 people in your lounge, still that caveat is that those two groups do not come in contact with one another. So those will be part of your procedures and protocols that you will have to manage. And also I would like to mention too that, you know, we do have our restrictions or our guidelines and guidance that we are giving to the clubs. But do be mindful that within different municipalities, or depending on what kind of facility you are in, you may have additional restrictions that you do need to work within as well. So, you know, not everyone is going to look the same, but at least from a Curl BC standpoint, we've given everybody the standard to open their doors. So there are some basics that everyone can expect regardless of which curling club you are participating in throughout the season.
Okay, thanks very much, Kim. Should we take one more question, or should we end it there? Is there a question that any of the panelists saw that they would like to answer live? So Melissa Sim has one.
There's a question here on, in the event that someone tests positive, do you quarantine the entire league or just the draw they participated in? And then do you require everyone who's potentially exposed to produce a record of a negative test? You know, in the best of situations, nobody will test positive at our clubs because we are so good at keeping socially distanced and wearing masks when we're outside or when we are in situations where we cannot maintain our social distancing. But I think with this one, it would probably be sort of a step-by-step process where you're thinking of who do you quarantine and how many people do you quarantine. So obviously, I think the person who is sick will have to be quarantined, and then the next set of people you look at whether you quarantine or not would be that person's teammates. So the other 2, 3, 4, 5, however many people you have in that team who've been playing, who have been in recent contact with the person before they are showing symptoms. And then the next group of people you'll think about whether they have to quarantine would be the team that they played against, and how much contact and how close they got in whether they got in and around the 2-meter bubble of the person who got sick, and then whether they would need to quarantine. And then you sort of expand the question of who needs to be quarantined from there. So I think you start with the individual, obviously, and then their team, and then you go from there. And I think the other question there about quarantining is not so much that you quarantine when somebody gets sick, as much as you start doing the self-assessment, and then and take the self-assessment test that is available on the BC Centre for Disease Control to see then whether you need to self-isolate. And then if you develop any symptoms, then what you do with that. So I don't think that we sort of need to panic if we have somebody who one or two individuals who have been exposed or come into our clubs with symptoms. I think we just need to sort of be thoughtful about how we do that. And then obviously, if the infection in the club becomes widespread, then yes, you would have to start quarantining a league and quite possibly the entire club at that point. But as I said, hopefully we're all doing our jobs here, keeping fewer faces, bigger spaces, as Dr. Bonnie says, and practicing physically distancing measures and keeping our bubbles small.
Okay, fantastic. And on that positive note, because we're not going to get sick,
No, we're not going to get sick.
I think we'll end the webinar, but we do know that there's a lot of great questions here, and we will put the answers to those on the website. So look out for that. We'll send a link to all the participants. So thank you so much for attending today. We really appreciate. There was over 60 of you here, so that's great. And we really thank you for being so responsive and so asking so many great questions.
And just a big thank you to the Curl BC staff that put in a lot of work on this. So well done to the group, and hope everybody's finding it helpful. And a thank you to all of you on the call and all the work that's in front of you. Just would encourage you to get others involved to help you. Don't let it be overwhelming for you. There are other people in your community that can help, and certainly we're here to help you as well.
Thank you very much. And I just forgot to mention as well that we'll be scheduling some sort of follow-up webinar after phase 3 is announced by Via Sport. And that one might talk a bit more about competitions. Thank you very much. Bye.